I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are standing in the dead center of the Karakum Desert.
Right, which is in Turkmenistan.
Yeah, exactly, in Turkmenistan. So you are in the very heart of Central Asia, and the first thing you notice is just the overwhelming, suffocating heat.
Oh, it's brutal.
It really is. The sun isn't just shining, it is like actively beating down on you. And the temperature is nearing a blistering 50 degrees Celsius.
Which is around 122 degrees Fahrenheit, for context.
Right, 122 degrees. And at that temperature, the air is so completely devoid of moisture that it actually burns the back of your throat when you try to breathe.
Just a totally hostile environment.
Exactly. And as you look out toward the horizon, literally in every direction, all you can see are these endless, rolling, unforgiving dunes of sand.
Yeah, just beige everywhere.
Right, a monochrome palette of beige and cracked, baked earth, broken only occasionally by, brittle, dead-looking scrub brush. And there's absolutely zero surface water.
None at all.
No lakes reflecting the sky, no winding rivers, no seasonal streams, not even a muddy puddle. It's just a vast, cracked frying pan.
Yeah.
And for centuries, modern explorers, geographers, and historians, they all looked at this exact wasteland and drew a very firm, seemingly logical conclusion. They thought this place was entirely devoid of human traces.
And you can see why they'd think that.
Right. It was just a blank spot on the map, a geographic void where human survival didn't just seem difficult, it seemed biologically and logistically impossible.
It is an incredibly hostile environment. And, hostile almost feels like an understatement here. It is the kind of landscape that actively and aggressively rejects human habitation.
Yeah, totally.
The Karakum is a place where exposure kills you very quickly. So when historians and archaeologists mapped out the ancient world, tracing the Fertile Crescent, the great river valleys, the Karakum, was universally considered a dead zone.
Just a place you avoid.
Exactly. It was a massive lethal obstacle, a void you had to carefully travel around, kind of hugging the edges if you wanted to survive a journey from east to west. The academic consensus was totally settled. Nobody lived in the deep Karakum. You just couldn't.
Right. And that absolute certainty is exactly why we are here today. The mission of today's deep dive is to look at a staggering pile of archaeological evidence. We're talking field notes, architectural blueprints of excavated ruins, and complex biological analyses that prove that centuries of academic consensus were wrong.
Spectacularly wrong.
Spectacularly wrong. Not just slightly off, but completely wrong. We are going to unpack the hard evidence of a massive, forgotten 4,000-year-old Oasis civilization from the 3rd millennium BCE that didn't just survive in this wasteland, but absolutely thrived in it.
And it is crucial to set the scale right away. Because when we say they found evidence of people in the desert, the natural assumption is that archaeologists, uncovered a few scattered campsites.
Right, like maybe some nomads.
Exactly. Maybe the remains of some nomadic tents, a temporary encampment, or even a desperate group of travelers who got lost and perished. But that is not what this is. We are talking about the discovery of a highly sophisticated, densely populated, deeply complex society that built a permanent home right in the middle of that very thermal nightmare you just described.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the focal point of all these documents, the absolute crown jewel of this lost civilization, is a specific site called Gonur Depe.
Gonur Depe, yeah.
And this wasn't just a humble village huddled around a muddy well. This was a heavily fortified Bronze Age metropolis hiding right beneath the rolling dunes.
The historical stakes of Gonur Depe cannot be overstated. It forces a complete recalibration of our historical compass. When we think of the Bronze Age, our minds immediately and naturally go to the heavy hitters,
The ones we learn about in school.
Right, the empires we all learned about in primary school. We think of ancient Egypt, the Nile, and the construction of the pyramids.
Yeah.
We think of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates, and the massive ziggurats.
And the Indus Valley, right?
Yes, the Indus Valley civilization with its meticulously planned grid cities, we treat those as the exclusive pillars of early human civilization. But the discovery of Gonur Depe shatters that exclusive club entirely.
Wow.
It forces us to recognize a society that rivaled Egypt and Mesopotamia in sheer physical scale, in the vastness of its trade networks, and in its stunning artistry. But what makes it so fascinating is that it operated in a completely different, almost paradoxical way compared to those other empires.
It is truly mind-blowing, but before we get into the weird, fascinating details of how these people actually lived and, what made them so different, We really need to talk about how incredibly difficult it was to even prove they existed in the first place.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you don't just trip over a massive metropolis in the desert. The narrative of the discovery itself is grueling. It reads like a survivalist nightmare.
It was a monumental feat of human endurance and archaeological obsession. The entire discovery hinges on the work of a Russian archaeologist named Viktor Saryanidi. He is the undisputed pioneer of this site, and his dedication is almost difficult to comprehend.
I mean, Saryanidi spent 25 years excavating Gonur Depe.
A quarter of a century.
A quarter of a century. Just try to wrap your head around that. 25 years out in that 50-degree heat, staring at dirt. And as he dug, he didn't just find a few shattered pots or a random foundation. Over decades, he slowly revealed sprawling artisan quarters, massive merchant depots, intricate residential blocks where thousands of people lived, and this sprawling, complex central palace that anchored the whole city.
The site covers 10 full hectares.
10 hectares. But when you actually read through his field notes, it doesn't feel like a triumphant, leisurely academic dig. It feels frantic. It feels like a desperate race against time because there was this constant, crushing triple threat working against Saryanidi and his team every single day.
And the most immediate visceral threat was the environment itself. The very desert that had hidden the city for 4 millennia was actively trying to bury it again the exact moment he exposed it to the air.
The elements out there are just brutal. The daily logs detail these severe, blinding sandstorms that sweep through the Karakum with terrifying regularity.
Every few days.
Yeah, we are talking about massive walls of abrasive dust that roll in roughly every 3 days. So imagine the psychological toll of that. You and your team spend days on your hands and knees, painstakingly brushing away centuries of hard-packed dirt with tiny tools to perfectly reveal an ancient, delicate mud brick wall.
Right.
You finally get it clear, you go to sleep, and the next morning a storm rolls in and completely buries the entire site in blinding, destructive dust all over again. You wake up and your progress is literally erased.
It's the ultimate archaeological Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill only to watch it roll back down.
It really is.
It requires a level of patience that borders on the fanatical. You are constantly fighting the geology of the region just to see the history. And yet, even when they finally manage to clear the sand, when they beat the weather and actually access the deeper structures, specifically the tombs, which are the most crucial aspect of understanding any ancient, unwritten society, they encountered the second major threat. And this one was profoundly disheartening: plunder.
But we aren't talking about modern looters with metal detectors, right?
No, not at all.
Right. It's estimated that a staggering 90% of the tombs at Gonur Depe were already pillaged in antiquity.
90%.
Yeah. Thousands and thousands of years ago, right around the time the city was active or shortly after it was abandoned, people broke in. But what is truly fascinating, and honestly a little unsettling, is that these ancient looters were incredibly precise.
Highly targeted.
Yeah, they were operating with surgical efficiency. They didn't just dig massive random craters hoping to strike gold. They knew the exact architectural layout of the subterranean tombs. The evidence shows they targeted the very heads of the graves, completely bypassing the feet, bypassing the torso, and tunneling straight down to the skull.
Because they knew exactly where the most valuable sacred items were stored in this culture's burial practices.
Exactly.
And that precision tells us a massive amount about the perpetrators. It strongly suggests the looting didn't happen by random desert nomads centuries later who just stumbled upon a graveyard. It likely happened relatively soon after the burials, perpetrated by people who intimately understood the cultural and spatial geography of the Karakum people.
So like an inside job.
Quite possibly. They knew exactly how the dead were laid out. They might have been the gravediggers themselves, or maybe a subsequent generation of the same culture going through a period of severe social collapse. They knew exactly where the silver and gold were placed relative to the body. But, as devastating as the elements and those ancient, precise plunderers were, the third threat to the site is perhaps the most tragic of all, because it is entirely a modern accidental catastrophe.
This is the part that genuinely blew my mind. It's what we can call the water paradox. So running straight across this ancient, arid site today is a modern canal. It is fed by the Amudarya River, and it was engineered relatively recently to bring irrigation water into the desert to support modern agriculture.
Right.
But because it's an unlined or poorly lined canal running through highly porous desert sand, it leaks. The ground humidity spreading out from this modern canal is seeping into the ancient strata, and it is slowly, steadily rotting the 4,000-year-old artifact.
Devastating.
The delicate ceramics are deteriorating, the metallic artifacts are corroding at an accelerated rate, and the ancient bones buried beneath the surface are literally turning to mush.
Wait, I just have to pause on this.
Yeah.
So water, the very thing this ancient desert city would have killed for, right? The exact thing they desperately engineered everything around to survive back then is actually the thing destroying it today. It's like a rescue ship accidentally sinking the lifeboat.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It is a profound, almost cruel historical irony. The very element that allowed Gonur Depe to exist in the first place is now acting as its modern executioner.
Wow.
And this creeping rot from the canal highlights the absolute critical urgency of this excavation.
We can't just wait.
No, we don't have the luxury of leaving this site for future generations with better technology to excavate because there won't be anything left. What's fascinating here is that this civilization left absolutely zero written language.
None. Like seriously, zero. Absolutely zero. No hieroglyphs carved into temple walls.
Yeah.
No cuneiform pressed into clay tablets recording grain shipments. No Rosetta Stone waiting to be deciphered. Nothing.
Not a single etched tally mark or a diary or a royal decree.
Not a single one. Which means the physical site itself is the only text we have. The exact layout of the mud bricks, the microscopic chemical composition of the bones, the distinct layers of dirt, the highly specific placement of a single ceramic bowl sitting next to a skeleton's left hand versus its right, that physical arrangement is their entire archive.
Wow.
That is their library. We have to read the material culture because they left no written culture. So if that ground humidity from the canal rots the bones and degrades the context of the artifacts, their history isn't just damaged or slightly obscured, it is erased completely. For a second time.
That puts an unimaginable amount of pressure on the archaeologists. It means every single scoop of dirt matters. Every millimeter of sand brushed away could contain a microscopic clue that changes our understanding of who these people were. And since they can't just read a king's proclamation to figure out their society, they are forced to treat the unlooted tombs, that tiny remaining 10% that the ancient grave robbers missed, as these critical, pristine data vaults.
Exactly. When you are deprived of text, you are entirely reliant on context. You have to read the physical reality of the grave with forensic precision.
I want to break down exactly how they do this, because it is fascinating. For example, they look heavily at skeletal orientation.
Yes, very closely.
This isn't just noting that a body is in the ground. They are measuring exactly which compass direction the body is pointing, how the limbs are arranged, whether they are fetal or straight. That physical posture reveals deeply held beliefs about their religious cosmology, and when compared to other cultures, it points to their ethnic origins.
Right.
And then there is the ceramic placement, where the pots and bowls are placed around the body, like, are they near the mouth, near the feet? Indicates their daily routines and their dietary wealth in life. It really is exactly like a forensic crime scene. But the mystery isn't trying to figure out who committed a murder. It's trying to reverse engineer an entire culture's worldview from the way they arrange their dead.
And when physical anthropologists actually began processing the biological data from the Karakum people found inside these precious few intact tombs, a very clear, incredibly fascinating picture of a desert pioneer began to emerge.
Let's dive into that biology, because one of the first major findings was regarding their cranial structures, the actual physical shape and measurements of their skulls. The data showed they were highly homogeneous.
Very similar.
Meaning, across the board, from tomb to tomb, these people looked very physically similar. They were a unified, distinct, local ethnic group. This completely shatters the idea that Gonur Depe was just some melting pot of random, disparate travelers from different empires who got stuck in the desert and banded together. This was a deeply established, generational, local population.
We can even reconstruct their physical stature with remarkable accuracy. The osteological data shows that the average height for men was about 1.67 meters, which translates to roughly 5 foot 5 inches. For women, the average was 1.55 meters, or about 5 foot 1 inch.
Which seems relatively standard for the era, but the most shocking biological data point to me, the one that made me do a double take, was their lifespan. Physical analysis states they had an exceptional maximum life expectancy of 37 years. 37? To you and me, that sounds incredibly young. Was that actually considered a good run back then?
I understand why that sounds completely jarring to a modern ear. We're used to octogenarians.
Yeah.
But we have to place that number firmly into the context of the Bronze Age, and more importantly, into the context of an environment as brutally unforgiving as a 50-degree waterless desert.
Right, that changes things.
In that specific setting, an average maximum life expectancy of 37 is not just good, it is remarkably high. In many ancient, supposedly more hospitable societies, the infant mortality rate was so devastatingly high and infectious disease so rampant in cramped urban centers that the average life expectancy could hover in the 20s.
Wow, the 20s.
Yeah, so reaching your late 30s in Gonur Depe meant you were a resilient, well-nourished elder of your community. It indicates a society that wasn't just scraping by. They had found a way to thrive biologically.
And the researchers didn't just guess that they were healthy. They proved exactly why they were able to live that long in such harsh conditions. It wasn't just good genetics or luck. It was the result of what the archaeologists refer to as an agricultural miracle.
An absolute miracle.
When they subjected the bones of these 37-year-olds to intense chemical and structural testing, they found incredibly high bone density. Their skeletons were robust, which points directly to a highly vitamin-rich, nutrient-dense diet from childhood all the way through adulthood.
Which naturally forces us to ask a glaring logistical question. How exactly do you secure a vitamin-rich, nutrient-dense, varied diet for thousands of people in a landscape that has zero surface water, no rainfall, and is essentially an ocean of rolling sand dunes?
They found the answers quite literally on a microscopic level in the sand. They sifted through the dirt and found biological botanical clues. First, they uncovered the microscopic carbonized remains of legumes.
Right, beans and peas.
Yeah, we're talking about peas, lentils, and beans. Now, legumes are incredibly important because they are a massive source of plant-based protein, which perfectly explains the robust, high bone density we just talked about. But they didn't just stop at a few resilient beans. As they kept sifting, they found beaten spikelets of wheat and barley.
That changes the game completely.
It really does. It proves they weren't just foraging for wild scrub. They were engaged in active, large-scale cereal cultivation.
And we really need to pause and appreciate the mechanics of that. To grow wheat and barley on a massive scale enough to feed thousands of people requires highly organized, deeply reliable year-round water management. You cannot rely on a lucky rainstorm in the Karakum to grow a field of wheat. You need continuous, controlled irrigation. But the botanical evidence goes even further than just staple utilitarian crops.
This is the part that feels like a literal mirage when you read it. In the middle of this Karakum wasteland, where the ground bakes into cracked clay, archaeologists carefully sifted through the dirt of this ancient city and found grape seeds.
Yeah.
They found the discarded pits of plums and peaches.
Orchard fruits.
Yes, orchard fruits. In a 50-degree desert, it reveals a stunning agricultural diversity. They weren't just surviving on bland porridge, they were cultivating luxury fruits. And finally, the ultimate piece of the puzzle. They found wood fragments embedded in the architecture, and when analyzed, they were identified as poplars and tamarisks.
And that is the absolute smoking gun for hydrologists and archaeologists. You can perhaps manage to grow a few hardy desert crops with very deep wells or sporadic seasonal floods. But poplars and tamarisks are riparian trees. Their biology mandates the continuous, year-round presence of deep standing water.
Their root systems demand it.
Exactly. They simply cannot exist in a dry dune.
So when you take all these disparate botanical clues and synthesize them, the protein-rich legumes, the fields of wheat, the delicate peaches, and the massive poplar trees, it proves the existence of something monumental. It proves that this wasn't just a lucky spot in the sand. It means there was a massive, highly engineered river-fed irrigation network.
Incredible engineering.
They were actively channeling vast amounts of water from the Murghab River, which used to flow much closer to the region. They dug canals, managed flow rates, and artificially engineered a lush oasis that was capable of sustaining a dense population of 5,000 people within the walls of Gonur Depe itself, and spreading that agricultural wealth across 15 surrounding villages in the immediate area.
They engineered an Eden in a wasteland. They looked at a lethal desert and essentially bent the hydrology of the earth to their will. Without modern excavation equipment, without concrete, using only bronze tools, clay, and immense communal labor, they built a vascular system of canals to bring the Murghab River into the sand. It is a staggering feat of ancient urban planning and civil engineering.
It really is. It takes a profound level of societal organization to maintain canals like that. So we've firmly established how they survived physically. We know they were masterful agriculturalists and engineers who dominated their harsh landscape. But now we really need to pivot and look at who they were as a society, what they valued, because their culture is where things get truly weird and wildly divergent from everything we know about this era.
Extremely divergent.
While reading through the evidence, one specific glaring statistic completely stopped me in my tracks. It's a phenomenon that researchers call the anomaly of peace.
It is arguably the most defining and undoubtedly the most confounding characteristic of the entire Karakum civilization. It is the finding that forces historians to just rewrite their textbooks.
Let's lay out the facts. Across hundreds and hundreds of meticulously excavated tombs inside the walls of a heavily fortified metropolis that, as we will see, sat squarely at the crossroads of the ancient world's immense wealth, archaeologists found exactly 0 functional weapons. None.
Not a single bronze sword forged for combat. Not a single spearhead designed to pierce human armor. No shields, no maces, no chariots built for war.
Hold on. Every great Bronze Age empire we know about was built on conquest and blood. You don't just build a metropolis and hold hands. How did they not get conquered? I mean, human nature and history dictate that if you have immense wealth, someone from the sword will eventually come to take it. Were they hiding?
It is a completely rational objection, and your skepticism is totally warranted, because it goes against every historical instinct we have been taught regarding state formation. We assume wealth requires weapons to defend it. But the answer to this paradox lies in the very environment we spent the beginning of this deep dive discussing.
The desert.
The harsh desert itself acted as an impenetrable, continent-sized fortress. Think about the logistics of ancient warfare. To march an invading army of thousands of men carrying heavy bronze weapons and armor, requiring massive amounts of water and food daily, across hundreds of miles of 50-degree waterless dunes is absolute military suicide.
They never make it to the city.
Exactly. The Karakum people didn't need to dedicate massive amounts of societal resources, labor, and metal to building a standing army or forging weapons, because the desert was a far more ruthless and effective killer than any standing army could ever be. The geography was their ultimate defense.
Wow. So because they were physically insulated by this massive, lethal ocean of burning sand, they simply didn't have to obsess over war. They were free from the paranoia of invasion. And the evidence shows that because they didn't have to funnel their wealth and surplus energy into a military-industrial complex, society focused almost entirely on peace, on artistry, and on craftsmanship. They poured all that incredible surplus caloric energy from their wheat fields into creating pure beauty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally challenges our assumptions about how ancient metropolises develop. For decades, the dominant academic theory has been that civilization and organized warfare evolve hand in hand, that the centralized state is inherently born from the need to organize violence, either to conquer others or defend against them.
Right, that's what we're always taught.
But Gonur Depe proves that this isn't a universal law. It proves that if you manage to completely remove the threat of external violence, human beings will naturally gravitate toward an incredible, obsessive mastery of art, aesthetics, and communal well-being.
The researchers actually call them masters over matter, not men. And the surviving artifacts completely vindicate that title. The level of craftsmanship they achieve without the distraction of war is breathtaking.
Oh, the artifacts are stunning.
For instance, there is this bronze geometric scouted vase found in the ruins. It's not just a crude, functional clay pot used to hold water. It is perfectly symmetrical, featuring incredibly complex, mathematically precise geometric patterns etched deeply into the metal. Then there's a silver sheep-topped pin, which was used to fasten heavy clothing.
A very common functional object.
Yeah, a functional object, but it has this tiny, anatomically perfect, incredibly delicate silver sheep standing proudly on the head of the pin. And then, perhaps the most stunning piece of all is the silver turtle shell vase.
That vase is an absolute masterclass in metallurgy.
It is fashioned out of solid silver, but the artisan worked the metal to perfectly, flawlessly mimic the intricate hexagonal scutes of a real turtle shell. The attention to natural detail is astonishing.
And what art historians and archaeologists specifically note about these pieces isn't just their technical skill, but their profound aesthetic restraint. In many ancient, highly stratified cultures, wealth was displayed through overwhelming gaudy ornamentation.
Right, just piling on gold.
Yeah, just piling on as much gold, jewels, and chaotic decoration as possible to prove how rich you were. But the Karakum artisans practiced a deeply minimalist, highly refined philosophy of craftsmanship. They intentionally stripped away superfluous flourishes. They wanted to capture pure, elegant forms, the perfect geometry of a vase, the exact anatomy of a turtle shell. From a strict art history perspective, this specific philosophy of minimalist purity and natural realism would not be seen again in human history until the rise of classical Greece, thousands of years later.
It's sophisticated in a way that feels shockingly modern, like they appreciated clean lines. But here's where it gets really interesting. This intense obsession with aesthetics and perfect forms wasn't just reserved for pretty vases or pins. It was intensely, rigidly personal. The evidence details this phenomenon they call the rigid hierarchy of appearance. In the excavated tombs, universally, across both men and women, rich and poor, they found grooming artifacts, not just occasionally, universally.
The presence of grooming tools was deeply egalitarian in that sense, crossing gender and class lines, but it was also completely mandatory. It wasn't an option.
We are talking about highly intricate ivory combs featuring deep, beautiful carvings of pacing lions. We're talking about heavy serpentine palettes carved from this beautiful dark green stone that were used for meticulously mixing colored pigments. We're talking about highly polished, reflective bronze mirrors and delicate little applicators meant for applying precise eye paint. Now, my first thought when I read this list was, okay, they lived in a wealthy, peaceful oasis. They had lots of free time, so they were just a bit vain. They like to look good for each other.
It is easy to look at a mirror and assume vanity,
Mm.
but framing it as vanity is projecting modern individualistic psychology onto a highly structured ancient people. For the Karakum civilization, this meticulous grooming was absolutely not about ego. It was not about personal beauty. It was a rigid, ritualistic necessity.
Well,
It was the proper culturally mandated way of presenting oneself to the gods, to your fellow subjects in the city, and ultimately to death itself. To be unkempt, to have messy hair or unpainted eyes was not just a fashion faux pas. It meant you were spiritually and socially out of order. It was a chaotic affront to the harmony of the universe.
that reframes it completely. It wasn't about looking pretty for a mirror selfie. It was about maintaining cosmic societal order through personal physical presentation. You owe it to the universe to look structured, which segues incredibly well into a massive question. If they were so obsessed with maintaining this perfect, orderly appearance in daily life, what happens when the ultimate disorder arrives? What happens when they die? Does that meticulousness just stop?
Not at all. In fact, the meticulousness intensifies. The architecture of their tombs is perhaps one of the most revealing aspects of their entirely unwritten theology.
Let's look at the site maps of the tombs, which they refer to as the blueprint of the afterlife. Because when you look at the layout, a tomb at Gonur Depe isn't just a simple 6-foot box dug into the ground to hide a corpse. It is a complex structure divided into two very distinct, purposeful spaces.
Very deliberate spaces.
First, you have what researchers call the House of the Living, or the Day Zone. This is a subterranean space that features actual structural windows built into the earth and a physical hearth for a fire. It is literally designed and furnished for the continuation of daily waking routines. And then, connected seamlessly to this day zone by a physical doorway, is the House of the Dead, or the Night Zone. This is a quieter, walled-off section where the body actually rests.
And as we touched on earlier, the body in that night zone is never placed haphazardly. There's a strict, unyielding orientation. Every single time, the head is pointing precisely to the north, and the face is turned specifically toward the west.
So when we strip away the dirt and just look at the architecture, a day room with a hearth connected to a sleeping room, with the body always facing a specific direction, what does this physically tell us about what they believed happened after you took your last breath?
It synthesizes into a brilliantly clear, almost pragmatic theological worldview. The Karakum people believed the afterlife was simply a seamless physical continuation of their mortal existence. There was no concept of a fiery underworld of torment, nor was there a distant, ethereal, heavenly realm floating in the clouds.
Just the next room.
Exactly. You simply walked from the day zone of life into the night zone of death. You still needed your hearth to cook. You still needed your ivory comb to maintain cosmic order. You still needed your beautifully crafted silver vase to drink from. Death wasn't a profound transformation into a spirit. It was just moving into the next room over. The journey was incredibly short.
There is something strangely comforting about that. It demystifies death completely, and they didn't have to make that transition into the next room alone. The evidence highlights these remarkable, slightly eerie statuettes of the Mother Goddess, and her dual role in this society is fascinating. In the realm of the living, in the actual houses above ground, These goddess statuettes were crafted with two small, deliberate holes drilled right above the eyes.
Right, for strength.
Yeah, this was so they could be physically suspended with string from the ceiling, hanging directly over the hearth, actively watching over and protecting the family as they went about their daily lives.
She was a deeply intimate guardian spirit of the domestic space, ensuring the safety of the household.
But then, in the realm of the dead, down inside that subterranean night zone, those exact same statuettes were found. But they weren't suspended. They were universally placed specifically at the head of the deceased. They weren't tossed at the feet. They weren't placed in a corner with the food offerings. They were placed right above the skull, waiting to receive the person and guide them. It's almost like the goddess was a cosmic chaperone. She watches over your living room in the day and then physically walks you into the next world when you die.
That is a beautiful, highly accurate analogy. It points to a deeply intimate, deeply protective religious structure rather than a punitive one. The gods were close by. But as intimate and intensely localized as their domestic and religious lives were, we absolutely cannot make the mistake of thinking this civilization was isolated or parochial. Because the sand surrounding this city held anomalies that blew the geographic scope of this deep dive wide open.
Yes, let's talk about those anomalies, because this is where the Karakum goes from being a fascinating, weird desert city to an absolute global superpower. As archaeologists were meticulously sifting through the dirt of Gonur Depe, they started finding out-of-place artifacts, things that chemically and stylistically absolutely did not belong in Central Asia. First, they uncovered Harappan faience bracelets.
Very recognizable pieces.
Now, faience is a type of early, brightly colored glazed ceramic, and these specific bracelets originate from the Indus Valley Civilization, that is over 1,000 kilometers away to the east, across brutal terrain.
A truly massive, punishing distance in the context of Bronze Age travel.
And if that wasn't enough to confuse them, they also found a Mesopotamian stamp seal. This seal features a classic, highly detailed Syrian motif carved into it. That originates from the west, over 1,500 kilometers away in the opposite direction. So my immediate thought process when I read this was, if we're finding foreign artifacts, does that mean this city was just a colony for Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley? Was it just an opportunistic outpost set up by the powerful kings to extract resources from the desert?
It is a perfectly logical hypothesis. It's the first thing many historians assumed. But the hard anthropological science firmly and definitively debunks it. Remember that highly homogeneous cranial structure we discussed earlier?
Oh, right. The skulls.
The strict skull analysis of the occupants in the tombs, even the occupants who were buried clutching these exotic foreign treasures, proves they were absolutely undeniably local. Genetically and physically, they were Karakum people, born and raised in the desert. They were not foreign governors or foreign merchants who died abroad.
Okay, so if the people aren't foreigners, that means these objects, the delicate faience bracelets from the east, the intricate stamp seal from the west, arrived purely via trade. And given the sheer volume of wealth, not just casual accidental trade, but a highly established, continuous continental network.
Exactly. And this singular realization fundamentally realigns our entire map of ancient trade and power dynamics. The Karakum wasn't a blank dead spot on the map. It was the vital, beating hub. It served as the great caravanserai of the ancient world. Because it was located right in the middle of these massive empires, it completely facilitated and controlled the exchange of goods, of political influence, and of technological ideas across the entire Bronze Age globe.
The researchers literally call it the Proto-Silk Road. We are talking about a bustling, deeply lucrative intercontinental highway of commerce and culture, operating a staggering 2,000 years before the actual Silk Road we all learn about ever existed. 2 millennia before Marco Polo even conceived of traveling east, Gonur Depe was effectively the center of the world.
It requires a massive paradigm shift. It requires us to completely reevaluate who the major players of antiquity actually were. We have to look at the Karakum not as a peripheral outpost on the edge of the known world, but as a peer, a cultural, diplomatic, and economic absolute equal to the greatest empires of the 3rd millennium BCE.
If you actually put them side by side with other empires of the era, the contrast is insane. It perfectly illustrates how utterly unique they were while operating at the exact same level of influence. Take Mesopotamia, specifically the Syrian region. If you look at their urbanization, it was defined by massive, towering ziggurats reaching for the sky.
Right.
Their society type was highly expansionist, aggressive, and warlike. They kept their records meticulously using cuneiform writing on clay, and their major cultural export were those stamp seals we just found.
Right, a highly aggressive text-based society. Then look to the east at the Indus Valley, the Harappans. They built highly structured, perfectly grid-like cities focused on sanitation. They were intensely mercantile, completely focused on mass commerce. They had the Indus script for their record keeping, and they exported manufactured luxury goods like those glazed faience bracelets.
Then you have Old Kingdom Egypt, the titan of the era. Their urbanization was defined by the monumental pyramids. They were a society ruled by a literal god-king dynasty with absolute power. They kept their records through complex hieroglyphs, and they connected to this global trade network via the Levant region.
And then you place the Karakum Civilization, centered at Gonur Depe, right alongside them. Their urbanization was defined by massive, sprawling, fortified desert citadels. Their society, as we've exhaustively seen, was fiercely artisanal and entirely anomalously peaceful. Their record-keeping wasn't written at all. It was oral, structural, and deeply symbolic, embedded in their architecture and burial practices, and their role in the global economy. They were the indispensable central hub, the vital beating heart that connected the East to the West, allowing all those other empires to interact.
They were playing on the exact same global board as Egypt and Mesopotamia, just with an entirely different, peaceful, unwritten strategy. So what does this all mean? We arrive at the ultimate mystery of this deep dive. How does a civilization this massive, this wealthy, this globally connected, and this historically important just vanish without a trace for 4,000 years? Because earlier, we definitively stated they weren't conquered.
No, they weren't.
There are no weapons in the graves, no signs of a massive siege, no layer of ash in the strata indicating the city was burned to the ground by invaders. They weren't destroyed by human armies.
No, they were not. They were destroyed by something much more powerful, much more relentless, and completely indifferent to their wealth or their beautiful silver vases. They were destroyed by geography.
The betrayal of the Murghab River. This is the tragic, silent final act of Gonur Depe. We spent a lot of time talking about how their entire survival, the massive wheat fields, the lush peach orchards, the giant poplars, the water for 5,000 people relied entirely on that massive engineered irrigation network pulling from the Murghab River.
Their entire lifeline.
Well, geology is not static. Over time, due to tectonic shifts and natural silt buildup, the Murghab River naturally shifted its course. It moved 50 kilometers to the west. 50 kilometers. If you see the water moving away, why not just pack up the camels and move the city with the river? You survived in the desert this long, you are master engineers, just follow the water and rebuild.
It seems like a simple, logical solution in theory, but it completely ignores the tragic physical reality of heavy infrastructure in a fragile desert environment. A small nomadic tribe with tents can easily pack up and follow a shifting river. A massive, deeply rooted metropolis cannot. Think about the sheer weight and scale of what they had built over centuries of peace.
It's just too big.
The intricate, massive irrigation networks dug deep into the baked earth, the towering, thick mud brick walls of the citadel, the sprawling central palace, the incredibly intricate brick-built dual-zone tombs of their ancestors that they believed were literal houses for the dead. You cannot put a 10-hectare brick city on a camel. None of it could be moved.
I see. The very infrastructure that allowed them to conquer the desert was now literally anchoring them to a dying landscape. They were trapped by their own success.
Precisely. And in a harsh desert ecosystem, there is no gentle grace period. The transition is violent and immediate. The moment that river water stopped flowing into those canals, a fertile green breadbasket instantly reverted back to harsh, unforgiving desert. The massive poplars dried up and died. The wheat fields turned to dust and blew away. The soil baked back into cracked clay.
The civilization didn't fall to a bronze sword. It was quietly starved by the earth itself. The entire population of those 5,000 people in the city and the thousands more in the 15 surrounding villages were forced to instantly abandon their magnificent city. They had to walk away, leaving all that beautiful architecture, all those intricate silver turtle vases, all those perfectly oriented tombs to the creeping, silent sands.
It is a stark, terrifying reminder of the absolute fragility of even the most sophisticated, wealthy societies when faced with sudden environmental and geographic change. But what is truly staggering, what makes this story so vital today, is that the fall of Gonur Depe was not the end of the story. It is merely the prologue.
This is the data point that truly puts the scale of this discovery into perspective. The evidence drops this final, massive reveal. Gonur Depe, this sprawling 10-hectare metropolis that took Viktor Saryanidi 25 grueling years in the burning sun to uncover. Well, it is just one of over 30 sleeping citadels that have been mapped via satellite and initial surveys in this exact desert strip.
30. We really need to let that number sink in. We have spent this entire time marveling at the complexity, the wealth, and the peace of one single city. And there are 29 more resting beneath the dunes right now, completely untouched, waiting to be read.
Which means the excavation of the Karakum civilization isn't over. It's barely even at the beginning.
When this entire network of desert polis states is finally unearthed, analyzed, and mapped over the next century, it is going to require us to completely rewrite human history. We are not just looking at a cool, isolated lost city. We are looking at the gradual unveiling of a classical Bronze Age culture that was as vast, as socially complex, and potentially as globally influential as ancient Greece, but it existed millennia older in a place we thought was a dead zone.
It is absolutely incredible. We started today standing in a blistering, waterless wasteland, staring at endless sand, and beneath that sand we found an engineered oasis of peace, a society of master minimalist artisans, a massive intercontinental trade hub that thrived without the need for war, only to be erased in total silence by a single geographic shift of a river.
It challenges us to reflect deeply on our own permanence. If a civilization this massive, this globally connected, and this culturally rich can be completely erased by a single natural shift in the environment, and then completely forgotten by humanity for 4,000 years, what modern empires, what great sprawling cities or global economic hubs today are just one natural shift away from becoming a sleeping citadel, waiting patiently beneath the dust for someone to find them.
That is a profound thought, and definitely something that is going to keep me up tonight thinking about our own cities. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the Karakum's lost metropolis. Keep exploring.